My name is Don Roth, and I am going to present to you a study of God's calendar as portrayed in His holy word, the Bible. My background is that of an engineer. I spent 25 years in 2 large corporations. In those years, my concentration was solving problems for those corporations. Later, I started my own business, a machining business for 17 years. And that business was a successful business. It started in a 2-car garage and resulted in a company employing 45 individuals. The reason that I ended up with this study was the fact that in the year 2007, I was challenged by a group of people who kept a different kind of calendar. God's churches in general, as you probably realize, keep a calendar that is set by the Jewish authorities. And so therefore, they came along and said, well, your calendar that you're using is really wrong. The true calendar of God's Word is a calendar that's based on sighting of the new moon. Well, I thought about that, and that it was a fairly serious accusation, and it needed to be answered. But I wasn't at the time prepared to really answer it in the way that it needed to be answered. And the way that it needed to be answered was a factual way. Now, during the spring of 2008, we had in the Midwest a rather large flood. And as a result of that flood, I decided that I would present a study on the Noachian flood. Of course, that is, of course, the greatest flood that this earth has ever seen. And as a result of that study, in going through the Bible, I came across a rather strange, different approach in a sense. When I started studying it, I realized that Noah had left a large group of information giving dates and times, passages of times during that year of the flood. I thought this is a rather curious thing to do in a sense, and I wondered at the time, I thought, well, what does this really mean? Could this really be of any importance? And so I started documenting the passage of time during the flood, and I came up with a rather curious conclusion, and that is that the year of the flood wasn't 365 days or 360 days, as some would think, but was actually 385 days in length. Now, I'd like to show you how that is determined. Here I have this chart, and the chart shows the passage of time in Genesis. As you see, Genesis 7:11, it starts out that the flood began on the 17th day of the 2nd month, 30 days in the 1st month plus 16 days in the 2nd. Well, that comes to 46 days. The water, as everybody knows, 40 days and 40 nights. And then the water prevailed 150 days, and the water abated for 150 days. And if you total this up, you'll see that it comes to 386 days. Well, Genesis 8:3 says the water dried up on the 1st day. So you have to minus a day, and you come up with 385 days. Now, that 385 days is an important number of days because, in fact, it is one of the days of the calculated calendar. That or the length of a year in the calculated calendar. And of course, this is the calendar that most of the churches of God actually follow, is the calculated calendar. And I'll show you on the next slide a copy of this calendar. And this, as you can see in this calendar, you can see here that it calls out the length of the year in days. Here, 355 days, 354, 385, 355. So you can see that there's a variation in the number of days required to complete a year. Now, if you look down here, you'll see that in 1996, these dates, by the way, these dates are for the 1st of Tishri, or better known as the Feast of Trumpets. So in 1996, on Saturday, September 14th, that was the first day of the feast, the first day of the 7th month, which is the Feast of Trumpets. And the length of that year was 383 days. And so you can see now why, when I came across this particular length of time for the flood, it said something to me that this looks like it is, in fact, the calendar that God was using when he used his descriptions in the Bible. As a result of that, what I decided to do was to do a study and determine whether I could connect this length of time of the flood with the actual descriptions that we find in the Bible. Now, in order to do that, it required me I had to think this through. And many people, many men have done a lot of studies in which they have dated the Bible, different things that happen in the Bible. They've given dates to those happenings. Now, they have all started in the present and have worked their way back, utilizing the length of kings' reigns, etc., historical events, and so this is what they've used. And of course, none of them really agree. You can hardly find two scholars that agree. And so my idea here was a little bit different. I thought this through and I said, this is a problem. It needs solution. It needs a solution. And the only real mathematical way that you can solve this problem would be by starting back at creation and coming forward. And in order to do that, you would have to recognize that you're going to utilize segments of time in order to do that. And the only segments of time that we really have that would be absolute, that you could trace coming forward from creation to the present time, would be the length of the day and the length of the 7-day week. Now, as a matter of belief, we believe that the day that we keep, that we call a Saturday, we believe that is the Sabbath. And this is a matter of faith, really. We have no real proof. But what this study is going to do is going to prove that the very day that God created the Sabbath on, the 7th day of the creation week, is in fact a replication of 7 days to the present time. Now you might think, well, that's a pretty bold statement. In addition to that, I'm going to show that the holy days, or the high Sabbath days, those days like the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, all of these days, in effect, were fixed along with the fixing of the 7th day or the Sabbath day. This is a pretty strong order to be able to prove all of that. But in fact, this is what you are going to be able to see And you'll be able to see this through relatively simple mathematics and a simple, straightforward understanding of the motion of the moon around the earth rotating, which would give us a day, and the earth rotating about the sun, which would give us a year's time. Now, if we think about this, we have to understand when was the earth really created? At what time? And we can see here in Job 38, God is really taking this opportunity to give Job a lesson in humility, really. And he's telling Job, he says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together, all the sons of God shouted for joy?" So we can see here, this is a description of the actual creation of the universe. And of course, the earth is part of the universe, so it would be included in, or the universe is really connected with the earth. And so therefore, we can see that this was the initiation. But something took place. Something happened that caused the earth to become something other than what we see here. And we can look here at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, that was Job 38. And the earth became without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And so we can see that at this point in time, that the earth needed to be recreated because something had taken place. We're not going to look at that. We're just going to recognize that this is what took place. And so this is, in a sense, important because it's going to help us to understand what a day truly is. When does it start and when does it end? That's a question that we need to resolve. Now, we see here in Genesis 1:5, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day. And so he's telling us, it's clear, God is telling us, look, the day starts in the evening. Now, if we think about this just a little bit, it would be clear that the creation, the point of the creation here is the Garden of Eden. And so therefore, if the first day started at evening, then the people, or if you were 180 degrees opposite on the earth, you would be at high noon. And so it's pretty clear when you think about the brethren in Australia, they keep their Sabbath is ahead of our Sabbath. And so this is really, it's self-explanatory when you think in those terms. Now, the question is, well, how do we start the day? When do we start a day? And this is important to understand because it is going to enter into the information that we're going to be looking at. And so we have to see when does God start a day. Well, he says here, the evening is when he started it. And here's the information to back this up. And the king of Ai hanged on a tree until evening. And as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take the corpse down from the tree. Again, we see in Joshua, and after Joshua struck them and killed them and hanged them on 5 trees, and they were hanging on the trees until evening. So it was that at the time of the going down of the sun that Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees. Again, you can see it explains that This time is at the going down of the sun. That is the end of the day. Continuing on, here we find a legal definition for the end of the day, and we find that in Deuteronomy 24 in verse 15. Each day you shall give him wages and not let the sun go down on it. So again, you see, well, this is the end of the day. You figure out the man's wages after he puts in his time, right? Well, that's the legal definition. And we find in Daniel, speaking prophetically, and the vision of the evening and mornings, which was told to me true. Daniel 8:26. Now, we also have a place in the New Testament which spells out when the end of the day was. And this is a rather interesting situation. In Mark and in Luke, Mark 1 and Luke 4, we find the story of Christ going into a synagogue. And at that synagogue, he heals a man. And as a result of that, the president of the synagogue said, we can't have this. You do the work on 6 days, not on the Sabbath. You don't heal on the Sabbath. And so, well, what was the result of that? The people were fearful of this man who was in charge of the synagogue. And as a result, what did they do? Well, it was clear. It says, now when the sun was setting, that's when they brought their sick to Christ for healing. At that time, and it's spelled out in not only in Mark, but also in Luke. And so you have that same story. And it shows that the people recognized, well, wait a minute, when does the Sabbath end? Well, it ends at sunset, which means that's when the day ends. So they waited until the sun was setting before they brought their sick to Christ to be healed. And finally, we see in Ephesians 4, it says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. Again, depicting the end of the day. So we can see that in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, the end of the day is sunset. And the beginning, of course, at the new day is basically simultaneous. Now, the question is we are going to be looking at this, we need to understand something about when God set in alignment this calendar that we're going to be looking at. And we see this here in this Genesis chapter 1, verse 14 through 19. Now, it's rather interesting because most people, when they read this book, Genesis, and they read this scripture, they think that God created the sun and the moon at this time and the stars. He didn't really create them at this time. It was clear because we showed that the creation had occurred earlier. And so, therefore, at this time, what is God really doing? Let's read this. Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of heavens to give light to the earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of heavens to give light to the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, so the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And so what is he really doing here? Well, what he's really saying is that in that first scripture that we looked at, we recognized that there had to be, the sun had to be in existence because the first day we had light. We had an evening and a morning. And so therefore, it was in existence. What this statement is saying that God aligned, he set these heavenly orbs into place. It's like setting a clock, setting it to the correct time. And so the correct time for the setting was, in fact, that day one was the initiation of this gigantic clock that we call the universe. There's a basic principle that needs to be acknowledged, and that God set the heavenly orbits as a giant clock, making the universe operate as a whole. Now, this is something that if you've done any investigation as far as astronomy is concerned, you would recognize that this is what the scientists realize, that the entire universe moves as a unit. Continuing on, then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heavens to divide the day from the night. Okay, well, what is that, the dividing of the day? Well, it was the rotation of the earth. That is exactly what took place in that first scripture. God started the rotation of the earth so that it would, as far as God is concerned, would be the length of one day. And let's see, the night, let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and for years. The sun is for days and years. The moon is for seasons, holy days, festive gatherings, appointments, and signals. Now, this is basically what God, he set this up. Well, he set it up for us. Now, the question is, can we look at this creation and determine what his calendar actually reflects? And what, usually when I make this presentation to a group, one of the questions is, well, yeah, but what happened when God changed or had the long day of Joshua? And what also happened when he set the clock, the sundial back by 15 degrees in 2 Kings? Well, the reality is nothing really happened. I mean, as far as the day is concerned, the thing is that when God stopped the sun in the sky, he just stopped the clock. That's all. He stopped the clock. The sun stayed there. You can study and read Joshua, and you would see that that's exactly what happened. So what took place there? Did the day change? No, the day didn't change. It remained the same day. If it was a Thursday that this took place on, it remained a Thursday. It didn't change. And so when the clock started again, when the earth started turning and it continued its cycle about the sun, then the time continued on. So when the sun went down on that day, it was the end of the day. Didn't change the day count. The length of the day as we measure time would have been longer. That's true. And he did this for a purpose, to give Joshua time to complete his destruction of the enemy. Now, in 2 Kings, we see that he actually set the clock back. And this isn't a problem, really, when you consider that it's just would be like a mechanical clock. You'd set it back, and God just set the clock back by 15 degrees. It's no small thing as far as we're concerned, but as far as God's concerned, it wasn't. But it was an important sign to King Hezekiah. And of course, to us looking at this was a fantastic thing to be able to do. Now, actually, the clock God's clock is a little bit different than from the way that we think about time. And when we look at time, the scientists, they figured this out, and they said, well, look, now, wait a minute. 1 second is lost every 10 years in the 24-hour period. Well, really, what they're really saying is the Earth is slowing down a little bit. That's what that's really telling you. Very slightly, but it's slowing down. The rotation of the Earth around the sun changes at the rate of 10 seconds every 2,000 years. Again, you can see that the system is slightly slowing down. And what this really means is that, as far as we should be concerned, time really isn't really been affected hardly at all. I mean, 10 seconds in 2,000 years, it's not worth talking about when you're thinking in terms of days and years. Now, what this really means is we can go back, because we know that this is a constant, and we can now go back and figure a year on the present 365 and a quarter days. Now, I call this the solar year because this is the average length of the year. And with that average length of the year, you have 11.232 minute shortfall. So it isn't really quite 365 and a quarter. And this is an important thing to understand, is you'll see that it figures into our calculations. And if we look at this, this little piece of time, and you're going to see how this works out, you have 11.32 times. If you take this times 128, it equals 23.96 hours, and gives you the reason for subtracting a day at the end of this period of time. See, in other words, if you're going to keep your clock, our calculations accurate, you have to take into consideration that 11 minutes. And so if you use that, you'll see that you're almost one day. Well, if we would go to 129 years, it would be 24.148 hours. This being greater than 1 day of subtraction, so you wouldn't really use that. The other thing is, the 128-year cycle was chosen because it was a multiple of 4, thus simplifying the mathematics. In addition, if this error of 0.0384 were calculated, it would amount to 1.8 hours in 6,000 years, a negligible amount. When you think about this in terms of a calendar, it really wouldn't affect the calendar at all, and we are basically under the understanding that we're someplace around 6,000 years from creation. So that's why I used that figure. Now, what I'm saying here is the solar calendar proves biblical Sabbaths. Well, the reason that I use this title here is to show that this calendar, which is, and the reality is, it's a combination of the Earth rotating on its axis to give us the day, the moon circling the Earth, and the Earth in turn and the moon circling the sun. And so this is what we're looking at. This is what we're calling the solar calendar. And you're going to see how that is going to work out. Now, remember I said I needed to go back to a finite piece of time that I could follow from creation and bring that series of times forward. Of course, this doesn't really solve the whole problem. It is only part of the problem, because what it's going to allow us to do is to create a calendar that started at creation and came forward. Where does it meet our present calendar? We don't know that. This is what we're going to see as we go through this study. Now, take a look at this. You're going to see what I did is I said, well, okay, here's year 1, creation. It started, I took the 7-day week, and it started on the 7th day was the first Sabbath, the 14th, the 21st, etc. And if you follow that through, you come to the last Sabbath occurs on the 364th day. Well, that means if we go to year 2, we're going to have a day carryover. And we'll see that on this chart. The first Sabbath is on the 6th because of that one day. 6, 13, 20, etc. And the last Sabbath occurs on the 363rd day, which means you have 2-day carryover to start the 3rd year. Year 3, we find that the first Sabbath is going to be on the 5th because you had the 2-day carryover. And the last Sabbath on the 362nd day. So we have a 3-day carryover going into the 4th year. So here's the 4th year. First Sabbath is on the 4th. The last Sabbath is on the 361st day. But remember, we recognize that you have 365 days and a quarter in each year. So we have a leap year, which adds a single day. Now, we're all familiar with that. It's really quite simple, quite basic. And so in this 4th year, you have 366 days. And so the result is that you will have a 5-day carryover instead of a 4-day carryover like you might think you would have. So you have a 5-day carryover. Sabbath is on the 2nd, 9th, 16th. The last Sabbath is on 359th day. Results in what? A 6-day carryover to start the 6th year. We go to the next calendar, on the 6-year calendar, with a 6-day carryover. The first day of the first Sabbath falls on the first day of that year. The last Sabbath falls on the 365th day. Well, what does that mean? That means that on the 7th year, you start over just as if you were on the creation year. So you go into the 8th year, and the 8th year, the count is the same as the 2nd year. And so as we go into the 9th year, you see that there is a change, because normally, if the procedure were, you would just have a 2-day carryover, but because the 8th year is a leap year, you have a 3-day carryover. The 9th year, you have the same as the 4th year with a 4-day carryover to the 10th year. And so here we have the 10th year. The first Sabbath is on the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th, and the last Sabbath is on the 360th day. This is a 5-day carryover for the 11th year. So, well, so what, you might say? Well, here's so what. You can, if you think about this, you can create types of years. And this is what I did. I said a type 1 has a 1-day carryover. A type 2 has a 2-day carryover. A type 3 has a 3-day carryover. A type 4 has a 4-day carryover. Type 5 has a 6-day carryover. Type 6 has 0 days carryover. Type 10 has a 5-day carryover. What's the significance of this? The significance is these are the only types that you can have. You can go through the calendar as much as you wish, but this is what you end up with, 7 types of years. So when thinking about this, now this would allow you to build a calendar that could stretch out for over 6,000 years. And it would be accurate. Let me show you what I mean. Here's what I did. I took and I created a calendar. This is the solar calendar. And what I'm saying here in this calendar is you can see year 1, 365 days is the length of the year. This is the days that are carried over, and this is the type of the day. It's a type 1 year. So the next year is year 2, 365 as a 2-day carryover. It's a type 2, etc. Type 3, and we go to the 4th year, which is a type 10 because it has the leap year in it. And you can see what I did here. I said 65, 65, 65, 66. Every 4th year is a leap year. But remember, I pointed out to you a fact about the understanding that, well, we don't really have 365 and a quarter, and that it's going to take 128 years to accumulate that day. Well, what that means is at 128 years, you have to subtract that. But let's look at this calendar, continue to look at this calendar. Here you can see that I continue the 11th year, etc. It keeps on going. When I get to the 28th year, it's a rather interesting thing that happens. You can see here that this is just like the creation year. It starts all over. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5, 6, 1, etc. And so every 28 years initially, the calendar is repeating itself. When I was doing this study and I came along, I thought, "Whoa, this is really something that can be utilized." Well, yeah, it can be utilized in that we go here, we look at 56, just to show you that in fact it does do that. You can see here, here's the 56th year, and the 57th year, it starts over. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5, etc. You get to the 84th year, and you see the same thing. It starts over. And here we get to the 112th year, and you can see the same thing. It starts over. But when we get to the 128th year, we got a problem. At 128 years, the sequence changes, and you do not have the repetition that you had every 28 years. Now, I got to this point, I thought, well, does this mean that the calendar is constantly changing? Well, not really. Because as I went through the study and I kept building these calendars, I came to the year right here, 896, and we find that at 896th year, the calendar, guess what? It starts all over again. 1, 2, 3, 10, 5, etc. And this is exactly what happens. So every 896 years, the calendar repeats itself. Now, you can understand that with a calendar like this, you can carry this calendar out indefinitely. You can carry it out beyond 6,000 years and not have a problem. Let's take a look. Here's, if we wanted to find out how to set up a calendar for the year 3101, it would be real easy. We would go to this calendar chart that I call 3, and you would look for the year that you want. If you want 3101, you would go to the previous year, and you would see, oh, this is a type 1 with a 1-day carryover. So that means that the first Sabbath of this year would be on the 6th day of the year. So it's pretty easy. The ultimate here is the fact that this calendar is not disputable. I mean, it's absolute. You can say what you want, but anyone's calendars who disagree with this calendar has to be spurious. It can't be right, because this is just a matter of simple mathematics, isn't it? 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, you add them up, and this is how it comes out. And you lay this alongside of the circuit of the earth about the sun, and you come up with this factual calendar that you can see will be an absolute calendar regardless of where you want to go. Now, in this calendar thing, we have the detractors say to us who keep the calculated Hebrew calendar, they say, well, you know, we've got all these crazy postponements. We've got all these reasons for changing the calendar. Well, we're going to see that actually they don't really apply, but they have a purpose. Those postponements have a purpose. Now, the Jewish authorities, they use a lot of technical terminology in order to, I say, fog up the issue. And they say, well, you know, we have to move this date because we can't have two fast days in a row. Or if the sun is setting on a Tuesday at this point in time, we have to move the calendar by 2 days, etc. Well, the real understanding about all that is it's there for one purpose, to keep the alignment of the calendar with the moon, the sun, and the rotation of the earth about the sun. And so this is the reason. And it's pretty easy. Once you have the right explanation, you can understand how postponements work. They're pretty simple, the reality is. The average cycle of the moon is 29.53059 days in a month. Therefore, in 12 months, it is only 354.36 days long. Remember that I showed you in the calculated calendar example that we looked at that you have different lengths of days. And here's one of the reasons we're going to see. And this is about 11 days short of the solar year of 365.25 days, making it necessary to add an additional month 7 times in 19-year solar cycle. Now, I mentioned the 19-year solar cycle. Well, what that 19-year solar cycle is, it's relatively simple to understand. What it is a point in time when the moon, the earth, and the sun come into alignment. But they don't come into alignment exactly. There is a little bit of a problem in that alignment. Now, we'll see that what takes place here is the 19-year solar cycle has to be, you have to add an additional month or additional month 7 times in 19-year cycle, in that 19-year cycle. This also regulates the number of days per year. The only purpose is to keep the Hebrew calculated calendar aligned to the moon cycle of 19 solar years. So this is going to be an important factor that we're going to be looking at, is this 19-year cycle. Now, the result, this results in 6 types of years. 3 12-month years of length of 353, 354, 355 days, plus 3 13-month years of 383, 384, and 385. You notice the 385 here, right? Remember back what we talked about as far as the flood year was concerned? That was 385 days. That was the key to getting me to think about this. Now, we have the 13-month long years are 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 17th, and 19 years in the 19-year cycle. This is quite an interesting, to me anyways, was quite an interesting revelation when I started looking at this, because when I started out in the beginning of 2008, when I first started looking at this problem, I didn't really know any of this information. And so I had to do a fair amount of studying to resolve these different problems. As a result of these, what I did is I thought I would simplify this by making a chart. And in this chart is going to show you, it says here, short years in Hebrew calendar calculations. Well, remember, we said the length of year, 353, 354, 355. Well, what if I take these years and I say, well, the 1st of Tishri, here's the 7th month, is going to be on a Monday. Well, the first Sabbath of that month would be on the 6th. This automatically pushes the first Sabbath of that year to the first day. And you can see what I've done here. I've said, I put a red OK. It said, well, this year is OK to use. But this year is not OK to use. 354 with a Monday start for Tishri, you can't use it. And the reason is it results in a 4/11/18 Sabbath of Nisan, would result in the first day of Tishri falling on a Friday. This cycle cannot be used. The reason is that all of these postponements result in the fact that you cannot have the 1st of Tishri falling on a Sunday, a Wednesday, or a Friday. It's that simple. All these complicated rules that the Jews have are really boiled down to 3 simple things, and that is, you cannot have the 1st of Tishri on a Sunday, a Wednesday, or a Friday. And so that's what this reflects right here. It says, well, this would result in that. Now you can't use it. So the reason you can't use it is because it's going to put the calendar out of alignment with the cycle of the moon. And we don't want that. So you can't use it. And here we look here, if you have a Sunday start, of course, none of these can be used because a Sunday start results in a 2-9-16 start, and it puts the 1st of Tishri falling on a Sunday. So you can't use that. So we go to the next, we have a Saturday start. Well, you can see in a 53 length year, it's okay. 54, no. 55, yes. On a Friday start, no. None of them can be used. Okay? We go to a Thursday start, and we can see that here on a 353 length year, you can't use it. But you can use a 354 and a 355 length year. And on a Wednesday start, can't use it, period. Now, this is the most interesting one of all. And you'll see once you recognize an important part, you see that arrow there pointing to the 7. When you have a short year, there's only one time that you'll be able to use a Tuesday. The only time that you'll be able to use it is when you have a 354-day length year. This is an important understanding. You're going to see this as we get into the first calendar. 355, we can't use. And look what happens here. The first day, the first Sabbath is on the 7th. That should ring a bell to us for the creation. The first Sabbath of creation year is on the 7th day of the week. So this is what we're looking at. We go to the next calendar group here that are charts that I've made, and I titled this the long Hebrew years. So here you have 383, 384, 385. And we basically are going to go through the same thing. You can look at this, and you'll see that it results in the same thing. The only difference here is that we have 2 years when it begins on a Tuesday, we have 2 years that are okay, the 384 and the 385. The 383 year would not work. And so this is fundamentally is going to give us the understanding of the postponements. Now, we're going to go back to the calendar. This calendar was created by a gentleman who lived in the 1800s. He did this work, came up with this calendar, which is what we're going to use, and you're going to see that this calendar, astonishingly, this calendar is accurate for over 6,000 years. It's right on. And you're going to see that the days that we find on here are going to be the days that are going to match up with that original calendar, that chart 3 calendar that I presented in the beginning, the 7-day solar calendar. It's going to match. This is where the interest really lies in these calendars. So if we look at this, we're going to see, here we see September 29th, 2011. Now, this is, and the length of this year is a 354-day long year. And this is where we're going to be celebrating the Feast of Trumpets. This is the date that all, basically, churches of God, with the exception of those who have created different calendars, and they're going to be observing this day at different times. So we want to know that, well, is what we're doing correct? And so this is the calendar that we're going to use, and you're going to see some interesting things here. First of all, you're going to see that there are 13 of these cycles in this calendar that this gentleman, C.H. Lindo, created. And in this calendar, he puts in here the Jewish year. And he says, this year, in October 2nd, 1845, the Jewish year would be 5,606 years from creation. That's what he's saying. And he's saying that this year, it should be 354 days in length. That's what he's saying. Now, you'll notice that he has a cycle number, 296. Now, you'll notice that I put here in red a number 12, because this cycle, 296, is actually the 12th cycle in the line of 13 cycles. And we go over here, we see number 3. And this means this is the 3rd cycle in line. And this is the 7th cycle in line. The reason that they seem, and well, you say, well, why didn't you put them in order, in the right order to start with? Well, no, they don't work that way. But you'll see how this is going to work out. Now, the other thing that you'll note here is that I have 6,939 days. And what this is a total. If you total up these lengths of years, you will find that this cycle will have 6,939 days in it. And this cycle will have 6,940 days. And this cycle will have 6,941 days. And actually, this is these are the only cycles that you will have in C.H. Lindo's calendar. Now, we need to determine what was the beginning month of creation. I mean, if we follow Mr. Lindo's calendar, you would find that he calls out a different cycle for the beginning of creation. And he says in here, he speaks to Moses in Exodus 12. He says, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Exodus 12:1. Now, this was the only information that God gave to Moses that makes this statement, thus saith the Lord, really. There is no other statement in the Bible that delineates the first day of the creation. In reality, the first day. If you have the first day of the month, it is the first day of creation. Now, well, let's say, well, you know, God may have changed this. Is this in God's nature to change things? You know, think about the statements that we find, the biblical statements that we find about God. Let's go back. He said, for I am the Lord, I do not change. That's pretty basic. I mean, that's pretty simple. Malachi 3:6. And in Hebrews, in the New Testament, we find, thus God, determining to show more abundantly the heirs of promise, the immobility of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hopes set before us. If God changed his calendar, in effect, it would be like lying. In other words, if he said a person lived so many years, but he changed the length of his years, well, that's not a true statement any longer. Let's continue to look at these. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. James, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. He's not changing the time. James 1:17. Jeremiah 33. Thus says the Lord, if you can break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that there will not be a day and a night in their season, then my covenant may also be broken with David. Now, in their season has to do with what? the cycling of the moon. That's the season. And broken with David, my servant, so that he shall not have a son to reign on his throne with the Levites and priests, my ministers. And without going into great detail, this is, in fact, a truth today. But this is not the reason for the study. So I think that we should, in a way, take another look at E.H. Lindo's calendar, which I number chart 5 in the study. And it's a rather, when you consider that this man did this work without a computer, and as we're going to see, it's accurate for over 6,000 years, and he did this work without a computer, you would have to say that he was quite an individual. Now, he wasn't a priest. He was what they termed at his day and age was a bookkeeper. And of course, a bookkeeper dealt with figures and times and etc. And he was able to determine this. Now, as we look at this, again, this is the same thing. Here you see cycle 13, cycle 4, cycle 8. Here's cycle 1, cycle 5, cycle 9. If you would go through these cycles, you would find that the 1st of Tishri would fall in his, I believe it would be cycle, at the beginning of cycle 5 would be the first. If you carried this back, you would find it to be true. And you can do that simply by utilizing these numbers that he has here. Now, there are some things that I have added to his chart here, and these charts actually came from the encyclopedia, the 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which actually in turn was in Wikipedia, and that's actually where I got it, out of Wikipedia. And what I did is I made some little additions here to this calendar. You'll see here these yellow highlights that I have here. Now, those yellow highlights are there for a reason, because what they're going to tell you is that the year following this yellow highlight, the Passover would occur on a Wednesday. Now, the first Passover, as you will see as we look at the calendars, you'll see was on a Wednesday. In addition to that, if you understand your Bible chronology properly, you'd realize that Christ was crucified on a Wednesday, not on a Friday. Simply put, you can't have 3 days and 3 nights starting with a Friday and coming up with even a Sunday morning resurrection. It doesn't happen. And so that's why it has to be on a Wednesday. Now, you can see here how this works out. You can see, like, right here you have 2 yellow highlights together. And the result would be that this would be a possible Wednesday crucifixion, and this would be a possible Wednesday crucifixion. And this is some of the additions that I've made. In addition to that, you'll see that there are some red numbers here, and these will represent certain important times that biblically occur. Here you can see we have number 2, number 6, number 10. Let me see. Here's number 1. Here's the important, I wanted to point this out. Again, we see here that we have a Tuesday for the 1st of Tishri. And so what does that mean? Well, we remember back, it means that the first day of that year would be on the 7th day of the week. Continuing on, we go through, there are 13 of these cycles. And the 13 cycles, if you added them up, you would find that it would amount to 247 years. Now, you'd kind of think, well, a calendar made in 1800s, how could that possibly be accurate over 6,000 years? Well, it is accurate. And you're going to see that the accuracy, because as we go through these calendars, which in fact are going to represent important points in biblical history. And what we're going to prove is we're going to start out with the creation. We're going to show the creation in a calendar. We're going to show the flood year on the calendar. We're going to show the Exodus year on the calendar. And we're going to show the Joshua 5 year on a calendar. And it isn't that these calendars are going to be close. These calendars will be exact to the day. So let's get started. Remember when we were doing the short years and I pointed out, well, here you see this year, which is you notice that this is a nominal short year. So it would be the starting year. The reason that it would be the starting year is because the starting year started with the seventh day as a Sabbath. Let's continue on now. The total days, we're going to look at something here that until I came up with this particular chart, I could not really connect the solar calendar to the Gregorian calendar. But because of this chart, and it's a rather interesting chart, and I believe that probably no one has ever put together these figures in this way. But this chart is going to show some very interesting things as we look at it. You'll see here that this chart, which I call chart 6, starts out on the 19th year. Well, the 19th year is the last year of the 19-year time cycle. And these are the number of cycles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 13. These are the 13 cycles. Every 13 cycles, it starts over, doesn't it? And so we start at creation, and the 19th year. The total number of days in that year was 6,939. Now, if we go over here, you can see this is the total days of the solar calendar. And by taking the days and adding up those days in the solar calendar, we have 6,939 days. Now, you'll notice 6,939, 40, 40, 40, 39, 40, 39. You see the solar calendar is very consistent. It is either 39 or it's 40 days, basically. And so when we compare this, we say, and here is a word that's called lag. And what happens is we can calculate how far the calendars are lagging from one to the other. And so when we look at this, in the first 19-year cycle, you will have no lag. The reason is you have the same number of days in both years, and so you have no lag. When we go down here to the 13th cycle, you will see that we have a 1-day lag. Now, remember that in this calculation, this 2.0844 hours is the difference. It's what the moon is behind the sun and the earth when they come into alignment. Remember, I said they didn't come into alignment perfectly. They came into alignment almost perfectly, but not quite. There's this lag. And so if you look at this, you'd say, well, in 13 years, every year you're going to have this little lag. Well, naturally, in 19 years, it wouldn't show up. And so at the end of 13 years, you have 13 times this amount divided by 24 gives you 1.129 days. And so what do we find here? Well, we find 1-day lag. And so you can see how this chart 6 is going to follow the moon in effect in the lag. And you're going to see how these days are going to work out. Here in the second 13 years of cycle, you have 2.0884 times 26 divided by 24 is 2.25, and you have a minus 2 days. And here you have a minus 3, 3.38. Here you have a minus 4, 4.51. Here you have a minus 6. You're falling a little bit behind. But here you have 7, and you have 6.27. So you can see how the calendar is going to continue on. And you can see what I'm doing here. Here's the years. I'm following these years. You can see here 2,000. Here we're almost at 3,000. We go into page 3, and we find that we're in 4,400 years. Here is page 4. We are at 5,928. We're getting close to 6,000 years. And you can see, again, take a look right here. You see it's minus 28. If you calculate that 2.0844 out, it would be 27.9. So you can see how close it's following. Now we get to where we want to get to, in a sense. We come to a series of these 13 years, 13 cycles. And we can see that we are now, at the end of that 13th cycle, we're at year 6,175. And, oh, there was one other thing I need to point out. I can point it out here. You'll notice that I got a little star here, and it says 6,016. Well, what that tells me is, and I did this so that I would be cognizant, it is the 128th year. Remember I said we have to subtract a day every 128 years? Well, look at this cycle here. You have 39, 40, 40, 40, and this should be a 39 if you were continuing on with the standard cycle, but it turns into a 38. And what that means is we now have, for this year, a minus 29-day shortfall. And so you can see the importance of that 128. We can go back to page 1, and you can see that it works out the same way here. You can see here's the 128, the first 128 years, 256, 384, et cetera, going right through there. Also, I did include in this chart 896 is where the calendar starts repeating itself once again. So with this is an extremely important chart because it's going to allow us to combine the solar calendar with the Gregorian calendar eventually. But before we do that, we need to look at some we need to start, let's say we start with the creation of the 7-day solar calendar and HC, the Hebrew calculated calendar for creation. This would be chart 9. And so the first thing we have to determine is, well, what cycle would we be using? Well, the only cycle that you can use is this cycle that I got marked number 1, and that's the reason it's marked number 1. The only cycle that you can use, you have to have a nominal length of year, which is 354, and you have to have a Tuesday start for the Feast of Trumpets, which in turn would mean that you will have the first Sabbath occurring on the 7th day of that first year. Okay, here we see, I again show you that. Here's that calendar, and it shows, or that this calculation for the determination of how these days fall. And you can see on a Tuesday, 1st of Tishri falls on a Tuesday. The first day of the year falls on the 7th of that year. Okay, we are now ready to create a calendar. And this calendar is created as a result of the 7-day increments. It's created as a result of that solar calendar. And what we're going to do with these calendars, we're going to take the solar calendar, which is our absolute calendar. Remember, it cannot be changed. It's correct. It cannot be changed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to impose on top of the solar calendar the Hebrew calculated calendar. And we're going to see if the two will work together. And we're going to see whether at the end of 19 years we have we have no lag occurring. And so we're going to look at this. And there's a lot of interesting things to see. This in this chart, you can see that here's a number 1. Well, that's the first year. Well, on the first year, there is no question. The first Sabbath is on the 7th, and so the 14th, 21st, 28th, they are Sabbaths. And here we get down to the last Sabbath. It's on the 364th day, right? All right. Now, we're going to look at the Hebrew calculated calendar. We picked that up off of E.H. Lindo's calendar chart. And we see that, of course, the 7th day is the first day based on his Tuesday for the Feast of Trumpets. And you can see they start out 7, 7, and the days go along. Now, what we have in the calculated calendar is the average cycle of the moon is 29.5 something. It's over 29 and a half. So what you would do, and through mathematics you would actually be forced to do this if you handled figures correctly, and E.H. Lindo was a mathematician, and so he would apply for the first month 30 days. And you can see I put this is the month of Nisan, it's 30 days long. Well, what he's doing is he's stealing a half a day from the previous month. So now, instead of 29 and a half, it's just 29. And the next month, of course, again, he does the same thing. 30 days, 29 days, 30 days, 29 days, 30 days. And here we get to the 7th month. And the 7th month is the month that designates the first day of the month. And we know that from each Lindo's chart that should be on a Tuesday. Well, if you follow this through, and you'll see here the last Sabbath was on the 28th, 2 days carry over, the next Sabbath is on the 5th. And you keep on going, you'll see that each one of these days is just the addition of the 7-day calendar. And so we get to the 7th month, and it has 30 days. And what happens? It automatically has the 1st of Tishri on a Tuesday. It's fixed. You cannot move it. It's not movable. You can't change it. You can't adjust it. And I think this is what caused E.H. Lindo to do that. If we carry this through, we can see that I have the write-up here designating the different information that we're going by here. And you can see that this is a 365-day length year. This is a 354. The Hebrew calculated calendar is 354. So what's the difference? Well, that makes a difference of 11 days. So at the end of the year, we should see an 11-day difference at the end of the year, if our calendars are correct. And in fact, this is exactly what we have. The first Sabbath of the 2nd year of creation is on the 6th. And the first Sabbath of the calculated calendar would be on the 17th. 6 from 17 leaves 11. This shows that the two calendars are working. They're working exactly the way they should. So what does this mean? This means that this holy day of the 1st of Tishri falling on a Tuesday, it had to fall on a Tuesday. It couldn't fall anyplace else. There is no other place for it to be. And so, what is it that set the holy day? Well, it was the Sabbath. So the two go together. Well, let's see how it works out for the 2nd year. We're looking at the 2nd year. And so what do? You got the 6th, 17th. And what did we say about the 2nd year? Well, there was a 1-day carryover, right? So here's the 1 day. This is Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And so this is the 2nd year. 365th day ends up on a Sunday, so the Sabbath is on the 6th. And here, of course, we have the 17th. Well, you can't move that, can you? It's fixed. So here we go. 29 days, 29 days. The 30 day, 29 days, 30 days, 29 days, 30 days, 29 days. And what do we come up with? 30 days. This is the 7th month. And what does it say? It says that the 1st of Tishri is going to fall on a Sabbath. Well, what did E.H. Lindo's chart show? It showed, if you remember, it showed that second year. We can go back and look at that. You can see the second year, what should happen? The 1st of Tishri should be on a Saturday. The length of year is 355 days. Let's take a look at that. That's exactly what we have. We have the 1st of Tishri on a Saturday. So what that means is 355 days. So this is a long year in the short year. And so what happens? Well, we have to add some days in here. So instead of having 30 and 29, we have 30 followed by a 30, followed by a 30, followed by a 29, followed by a 30, followed by a 29, and this is the start, would be the start of the new year. And so if we look at this, we say, well, this year is 365 days long, right? And the Hebrew calculated calendar says 355 days. Well, what's the difference? 10. Well, we had 11 days before, so if we add 10 to 11, what do we get? 21 days, don't we? Oh, look what happened down here. We find that the 26th of the Hebrew calculated calendar of Nisan matches with the 5th day of the solar calendar. Whoa, it looks like we have an absolute calendar here, doesn't it? This is what this is showing. In fact, what this means is the fact that every Sabbath day, the start of the Sabbath day, results in a high day Sabbath being called out. And so once that happens, every high day and every Sabbath from that point on follows in the calendar. It doesn't change. It can't change. It's fixed. Let's go to the next year. Here you have year 3. And we can see that what's going to happen here in this year. Well, we have a 365-day. Remember, year 3, 2-day carryover from year 2. First Sabbath is on the 5th. The 12th, the 19th, the last Sabbath is on 366th day. Can't change that. That's the way it is. And so now we know that in this year, from our chart that Mr. Lindo gave us, this year it should be a long year, 385 days. 365 minus 385 is 20 days difference. Well, you got 21, now you got 20 from 21 is a 1-day difference. At the end of this year, if our calendars are correct, we should see 1-day difference. And in fact, that's exactly what we see. 1-day difference. Here you are. A 4. The first Sabbath is going to be on the 4th. The first Sabbath on the Hebrew calculated calendar for the beginning of that year is on the 5th. We carry this through again. Here we have 3-day carryover. Just like our chart shows we should have. The last Sabbath is on 361st day. Exactly the way it should be. And as we go through here, we see that this year is a 354 days long. And so this is a standard year. 30, 29, 30, etc. We get to the 7th month, and it says on the 7th month, we should have a Thursday for the first day of Tishri. And if the first Sabbath is on the 3rd, and you can't change that. It started at creation, continues on. You can't change it. It's a multiple of 7. We see that it's on the 3rd. That's a Thursday. And so when we follow those Sabbath days along, we realize as we get to the end of the year, what are we going to find? Well, we said that we were 1 day off here. Now it's 354 minus 365. But this is a leap year, isn't it? So this is the reason I went to the 4th year, to show you that even the leap year, it's going to still work out regardless. Here's the leap year, 366 days, 354 from 366. The difference is 12. So you had 12 and you had 1 bit left over. So you have 13 days difference. Well, what do we have when we get to the end of this year and the beginning of the next? We have a 2 under a 15. Looks like 13 to me. So what we are really seeing in these calendars is the fact that these calendars verify that the calculated calendar is accurate. It's the calendar we're using, and it is accurate. But there is more to be looked at. We're going to look at several calendars, and we're going to see if those several calendars agree with the biblical explanations, like the flood calendar, like the Exodus calendar, like Joshua 5. Here, what I'm going to show you here, we're looking at the 17th year, the 18th year, and we see, I'm not going to show you all the calendars. In the complete accompanying work that accompanies this video, you will be able to see and follow these calendars, each one, to see that they are accurate. But here we are in the 18th year, and you find on the 18th year that we have an 18-day discrepancy between the two calendars, and in fact, that's exactly what we have. 6 from 24 is 18. So we go to the 19th year, and on the 19th year, remember our chart said we should have what? No variation. And so the 19th year, we see that the year length is 385 days. The solar calendar is 365 days. The difference is 18 days. We had 18. 18 minus 18 is 0. And what do we find when we follow the 7-day calendar? Remember, you can't change it. And so we find a 5 from the solar calendar and a 5th day for a Sabbath day for the Hebrew calculated calendar. Quite accurate, quite interesting. Now, I included here a write-up that you can find in the International Standard Biblical Encyclopedia, January 1994 printing, page 305. And one of the main arguments, in a sense, against the calculated calendar is that, well, the calculated calendar, we have no proof that it was in effect. Well, here is physical proof. This is an article talking about a papyrus that was dug up in Siena, Egypt. And this papyrus was dug up in a synagogue that was where Johanan fled to with the king's daughters to Egypt, against Jeremiah's instruction. He said, don't do that, just stay here, everything is going to be fine. But they thought they were looking for the protection of the Pharaoh, the Egyptian Pharaoh, which he failed because Nebuchadnezzar came along and conquered him. But this papyrus was dug up, and this papyrus, what it contained is the calculated calendar. The calculated calendar, it shows the figures for the calculated calendar, along with the holy days, how they fall. And so the reality is that the calculated calendar was in effect before the Babylonian captivity. This is one of the main points that people make. Well, you can't depend on it because the Babylonians, they kept the moon calendar and they affected the Jews, and that's why their calendars are off, because the Babylonians affected them and they didn't have it right. But this shows here, and if you take the time, you can go ahead and read this in the written portion of the presentation. And so we're going to go, at this point, we're going to go on to the flood calendar. And we're going to see that he says in verse 4 of Genesis 7, God speaks to Noah, stating that after 7 more days he will cause it to rain on the earth. Then in verse 11, the Sabbath day for that year is given. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And so here we have one of the important things that we need to recognize about the flood. Now, if we are going to jump forward, roughly 1,656 years in calendars, and we can show that this calculated calendar is still right on, we can show this by demonstrating that it's going to show for the year of the flood, it's going to show that that 2nd month, the 17th day, is going to be a Sabbath. And it will also show that that year is going to have 385 days in length, which is right out of your Bible. So it's going to substantiate, the calendars are going to substantiate the account, the biblical account. We're going to see this. Now, most commentaries will take Genesis 5 and go through it, and they'll add up the years, as I show here, 1656, and they'll say, well, this was the year of the flood. Well, was it the year of the flood? I mean, if we think in any kind of normal terminology, it could be, which would mean, in order, if we look at this, what we have here is the length of years that Adam lived until Seth, and the length of years Seth lived until Enos, and etc., and the add them all up, plus the 600 years. He was 600 years old at the beginning of the flood, and if you add all that up, it's 1656. But what it would require, if you think about this, it would mean that every one of these men would have to be born on the exact same day that Adam was born. Otherwise, these days become lengths of time not connected to yearly cycles. So when you add all this up, what you would say is 1,656 years would go by from creation to the flood minimum. It couldn't occur before that, but it could occur anytime after that, depending on the length of life or the birth and death of these men that we are looking at here. And so because the cycle of the Hebrew calculated calendar is 2.084 longer than the corresponding solar calendar of 19 years, well, what I will do is just make it short, is the fact that what we're going to do is we're going to go into Mr. Lindo's calendar in order to determine where to look at the calendar. We need to know how many cycles are involved in this length. So naturally, you would divide the 1656 by 247, and you'd get a number, and then there would be a bit left over, and you'd take that number that was left over, and it would determine what cycle. And so from creation, we find that then it is in the 10th cycle of the Hebrew calculated calendar, chart 5. Year 3 of the Hebrew calculated calendar is the 13-month year, which would be the first possible year of the flood. The Hebrew calculated calendar for this year is 383 days long. And so I point to the fact that you need to look at the article about Noah's flood on our website. And so we see here, as the Hebrew calculated calendar shows, there is no year that meets the 385-day requirement until 1661. And this is in the range of years that you would find the flood to have occurred in, because that range would be anywhere from 1656 to 1664. That's the possible range that the flood would have occurred. It would have to have occurred in one of those years. And so if we look at this chart, we can see that this is the 10th cycle, and we can look at this 10th cycle, and we can see that the first year length would be 355, and the second, and so on, down to here to 383, which I mentioned. It would be the first long year, but that is not the correct number of days. So if we continue on down, we'll find that here we have 385 days. The question is, would a Thursday start for Tishri end up with the second month, the 17th day, as a Sabbath? That's the question. Well, how do we construct this calendar? That's the next thing that we have to look at. So we look at chart 6, and we know that we should be somewhere here, 1656. Well, the last 19-year cycle ends on 1653, so we would have to start on cycle 10. And you can see that from E.H. Lindo's chart, that's where we were starting. We go to chart number 3, and here, 1653, we find that this is a type 3 year with a 3-day carryover. So our calendar would have to show that for the year 1654, which is where it's going to start. The year 1653 is arrived at by beginning with cycle 1 of chart 5, creation, and going forward in increments of 247 years, which is 6 complete 247-year cycles plus 171 years. And if you divide that out by 19, you end up, at this point on chart 6, shows that the Hebrew calculated calendar has gained 8 days. We can go back and you take a look at that, and we can see here's the gain right here. 8 days is what we should find at that juncture. So when we're putting everything together, we should start our calendar with an 8-day lag. So, and we should start our calendar with a 3-day carryover. And this is what we have. Here's the calendar with a 3-day carryover. The first, the second, the third, the fourth is a Sabbath, the 11th is a Sabbath. Well, we said we had to have 8 days, right? So when we're looking at this, we see that here's our 8 days. 3 versus 11 is 8. And then 10 versus 18 is the 8. So we have the 8 days. It's in there. We also have to find out whether we're meeting the requirement of the Saturday for the first day of Tishri. And that's exactly what we have here. So this is so clear that these calendars cannot be disputed. The calendar, you have, and the absolute solar calendar, we show how it fits. And here we see how E.H. Lindo's calculated calendar, Hebrew calculated calendar, matches perfectly. Well, let's see how it works out when we get to the end of the year. We know that this year has 355, and the 355 days, 365 days for the solar year, and the difference is 10. And so we had 8 and 10. So what happens is 10 minus 8 leaves 2. And so therefore, we have at the end of the year, this is a Sabbath, and here's a Sabbath for the first Sabbath of the first month of the following years on the 5th. So we have the 2 days. The calendars are following each other perfectly. There's no difference. We can go, I go to the second year, showing the same thing. We start out with the 2-day difference. Here's the 2-day difference. What should happen here on the 7th month, you should have a Thursday for the first of Tishri, and that's puts the Sabbath on the 3rd. And so we find, well, that's right on. It hasn't changed. It's right on. And we find that in this year is 354 days versus 365, and the difference is 11 days. And if we take that 11 days and add it to the 2, you should have 13-day difference. And this is exactly what you have. The 2nd is a Sabbath, and the 15th is a Sabbath. It's 13 days. Now, I don't go through all of these calendars. What I do go through is I carry us right to the flood year here. And we can see that here's the year of the flood. What we're looking for is a 385-day year, right? Well, if we go back to E.H. Lindo's calendar, and you can see that I have the dates here. And here I wrote flood in. This is the date for the flood. It's a 385-day. It's a Thursday for the 1st of Tishri. Okay, let's go back to the calendar for the flood year. And we know that from the previous year that the 2nd versus the 12th, there should be, we should have a 10-day difference. And this is what it says here. We should have a 10-day difference. And this was a leap year, by the way. And again, you can see that the leap years, they fit right in regardless, because they're accurate. And if you divide this out, you'd find that this was a leap year. And so this would be 366 days. So you notice that this was on a Tuesday. The last day here is on a Thursday. We skipped Wednesday. And as a result of that, the calendars come out. 12, 2, 10 days like it's supposed to. And so now we come to the year of the flood. And so this year, we should find that we have the 2nd month, a 17th day of the 2nd month should be a Sabbath. So here we go. 12th, 19th, 26th, 5, 10, 17. There's the 2nd month. There's the 17th day of the 2nd month. And here we have 385-day year. And as a result of a 385-day versus 365 is a 20-day. You take 10 from the 20, and it leaves you a 10-day difference. And what do we find? The first Sabbath of the following year is on the 5th. And we see the corresponding Sabbath would be on the 15th. You can't count these Sabbaths because these Sabbaths are in the old year. So you have to find out where are you going to be at in the new year. And here you have the 10 days that's required. So in effect, what I've shown you here is the fact that these calendars show you exactly the year of the flood. The year of the flood being 1661. This is the year of the flood. How do we know that it's the year of the flood? Because all of the requirements for the year of the flood fit this calendar. All the requirements of the Bible being a Sabbath on the 17th of the 2nd month, 385 days, it being within the range that you would need to find the flood as far as the descriptions that we find in the book of Genesis. So here we go. If you had a computer program, you could follow this program month for month, day for day, Sabbath for Sabbath, right up through the flood year. It would be continually that way. Now, well, why did we go through all that business about the postponements? Well, the postponements have a function. We don't have a calendar that starts in creation and comes forward. I mean, we could, obviously, someone with the smarts could do it, but I don't have those smarts. I could create a program that would allow you to do that. But we don't have that. So what we do have is the postponements. So the postponements allows us to enter into any specific year and come up with the right requirements for that year. That's all. That's the only purpose for the postponements. They have no other reason for being in existence. But it's a convenient thing, and you would have to recognize that it was pretty important to the Jews because they didn't have computers either. Let's continue on. The point is, it must be remembered that the progression of the weekly Sabbaths is unbreakable. The calendar of the Bible, when the Bible gives a Sabbath date, any calendar not in agreement would be spurious. In the case of the flood, there are two markers: the number of days in the year, 385, and the Sabbath in the second month of that year. This is the second step showing the alignment of the 7-day solar calendar and the Hebrew calculated calendar to the biblical account of the flood. The two are in agreement. We're going to continue on. I'm going to show you that this is not just good for the flood, but it also applies to the Exodus. And here I make a notation, establishing the year for the Exodus. Well, how do we know when the Exodus occurred? Well, the Bible will tell us. You may not think so, but the Bible does tell us. The third sabbatical guidepost is found in Exodus 16, where the Bible account relates that in the year of the Exodus, the 15th and the 22nd days of the second month were Sabbaths. This is the account where God rained manna, as Genesis 5 gave the potential for the year of the flood. Genesis 11, 10 through 32 gives the range of the years to Abram's departure to the land of Canaan. This will lead to the year of the Exodus. Again, God gives us blocks of time in years not necessarily corresponding to calendar progression of years. This is the way it is. And here, if you think about Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 10, gives some dates and ages of God's patriarchs. And here we can see that what he says, that Shem begot Aphax after the flood, 2 years after the flood. So we put 2 in there. And Aphax, he begat, and it keeps on going right down here to the end, Nahor. And if you add up all these years, you will come with a total of 222 years. So from the flood, God is telling us, he says, well, look, here it is, it's set. Now, there is a little confusion here, because when you read the biblical account, you might be fooled, but you have to do a little bit of mathematics here in order to come up with the correct number of years. Now, Terah, who was the son of Nahor, died at the age of 205. He was Abraham's father. Terah's death, Abraham was 75, meaning that Terah was 130 years old at Abraham's birth. You see, this is an important factor. So adding that to the 222 years gives you 352 years from the flood to Abraham leaving Haran. Well, we're not there, are we? We got some ways to go yet. Well, okay, let's find out. Abraham was 75 when he left Haran. The wanderings, as stated in Exodus 12, 40 through 41, was 430 years to the day. So what he's saying is the wanderings was 430 years to the day. So what you would do is you would add 432 to that 352 of the patriarchs. And you would get 782 years. Adding this to the flood year, 1661, the earliest year for the Exodus, would be 2518 AM. Now, when I say AM, that's after man. These are dates that start from creation and come forward to us. Well, we still aren't there yet. We still aren't able to know how the calendars will mesh, but we're getting there. When considering the time of the year when from birth to birth, this could be as late as 2526 AM. That is after man. So, in other words, here's the time frame. Exodus has to occur between 2518 years from creation to 2526 years from creation. It's quite simple. It's strictly mathematical. We continue on. In order to correctly place this date in the Hebrew calculated calendar, it must first be divided by 247. So we go through the same procedure that we went through to determine what cycle we should be in. And this results us be in this places the date, 2518, in the 10th year of cycle 3, line 10 of chart 5, page 1. There is an additional marker showing the correct placement of the Exodus. This is found in Numbers 1:1. And this is a rather interesting thing. Most people aren't really aware of the fact. But in Numbers 1:1, God is talking to Moses, and he gives a date. Now, you can say, well, again, what sense does this really make? Well, it makes a very important sense, because it's going to give us a key to know to be able to know accurately when the Exodus occurred. And here's the key. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle meeting on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they came out of the land of Egypt. So what this means is that we are going to have 2 years that start out exactly the same way. You're going to see that the second year has to have the first of Tishri falling on the same day. It has to have the same rotation of Sabbaths that the year of the Exodus has. You have to have 2 years that are not exactly the same, but they start out exactly the same. They have different number of days in each year. So here we are looking at here's cycle 3 that we said we need to start out with. And here we need to start our calendar on this date. Now the only place that I can start is on a 19-year time cycle. And so this is where we have to start. And so here we see that this should be a Monday for the first of Tishri. And the year length should be 355 days. So, all right, let's take a look and see if our chart 3, this is the continuous running calendar of 7 days. And if we look, here's 2508. Which would be the previous year, the 2509, the year that we started looking at. And we see that, well, here it is a type 1 with a 1-day carryover. So that's how we have to start our calendar. Also, when we look at chart 6, it's going to tell us how many days it's going to be in lag on 2508. It's going to be 12 days in lag time. So we have to incorporate that 12-day lag time in our calendar, don't we? And so here's the calendar. 1-day carryover, 6th day is a Sabbath, and what we said, there were 12 days of lag time. And so when we look here, 6 and the 13th is a Sabbath, would be on the 13th. 6 and 7 is 13. And the first day of the month would be on the 1st, the Sabbath would be on the 1st, and there we have our 12 days, don't we? 12 days of lag time. How does this work out? On the 7th month, the first day of Tishri would be on a Monday. Well, the first Sabbath is on the 6th. Well, what does that mean? That means that it's on a Monday. It's on a Monday. We place this on a Monday, and if we figure backward, this has to be the day. You can't change it. It's fixed. It has to be the day. So when we look at that, we said we started out with 12. This is a 355-day year. And we have a 365-day solar year. The difference is 10. So you take 10 from 12, leaves 2. So at the end of the year, we should have a 2-day difference. Voila, we have a 2-day difference. And so all I'm showing here is this is the start of the series of calendars that's going to lead us to the Exodus calendar. And all I'm going to do is I'll show these first 2 calendars, 2509 and 2510, and they agree, the Sabbaths agree, the holy days agree. The first Sabbath is going to be on a Saturday in the second in 2510, and sure enough, that's where it is. Once you start, you can't move. Everything moves in segments of 7. Can't change it. It's fixed. Now we go to 2518. The reason I show 2518 because I want to just show that it carries forward into 2519. And so when we look at this, we're looking at this year, the Hebrew calculated calendar is 354 days long. The solar calendar is 365 days. The difference is 11 days. 11 days minus 2 days. The difference is should be 9 days, and that's what it is. We go into this is the year of the Exodus. Now, remember I said the year of the Exodus, we should have 2 years running where we have identical Sabbaths. And that is, in a sense, is part of the proof. It shows that these calendars that I have constructed here are correct. This year, the Hebrew calculated calendar is 385 days long. 365 days from 85 is 20. Remember, we had a difference of 9, so we have here 11 days are left over. 9 from 20 is 11. So when we look down here, we should see that we have 11-day difference. 3 and 14, we have the 11-day difference. And remember, we started out with a 9-day difference, and so we show here a 9-day difference, 17 and 8. And if you carry it forward, you can see in the second month, you have the 17th, 24th. 24 from 30 is 6, so the first Sabbath would be on the first day of the second month. The 8th day, the 15th, and the 22nd. Now you see, remember, Numbers 1 said that the first day of the second month, God met with Moses in the tabernacle. This would be a normal Sabbath. This would be when God would meet with Moses in the tabernacle. It would be on the Sabbaths. And so you can see why I am using this, and you can see the key here. The key being that the Sabbaths occur exactly the same. When you have the first of the Sabbath, the 8th, the 15th, and 22nd. Here, in the 520th year, you find the same Sabbath rotation, 1, 8, 15, 22. Also, here's the first month. And remember, the 14th of this month would be the Passover. Well, the 10th of the first month is a Sabbath. So, 11th would be Sunday, the 12th would be Monday, the 13th would be Tuesday, and the 14th would be Wednesday. So we see that the 14th day, the Passover day, falls on a Wednesday for the year of the Exodus. So you can see that the calendar is following the biblical description that we find in Exodus. Exodus and Numbers 1, both of them. So now we're going to go into the dates for Joshua 5. Now, at this point in time, we should remember that what we've done is we've gone through the biblical account of the creation, and we showed how it matches the solar calendar, the absolute calendar, and how it matches the account of the creation. We also have gone through the biblical account of the flood, and we've shown how those calendars match the biblical account of the flood. We followed that with the Exodus and showed how the dates in Exodus and Numbers matched those dates that we found in these calendars, in the Hebrew calculated calendar. And so we have, in effect, all of these dates proving the calculated calendar. We are now going to go into the dates for Joshua 5's Passover, which is the first Passover in the Promised Land. There are some things that a lot of people really aren't aware of. One of these things is the fact that Moses, in effect, did enter the Promised Land. A lot of people think he didn't, but the Bible shows that he did. And another point, in fact, is that, if you don't recognize that Moses was in the Promised Land, you would not also recognize that the Israelites had an adequate time to raise the first crop in order to perform the wave sheaf offering. Now, the objection has always been that, well, you can't have a wave sheaf offering unless you have a crop raised by the Israelites. You can't use a crop raised by the nations that were living in the land at that time. It had to have the purity attached to the crop being raised by the Israelites. And so that's another point. Another point that is important, of course, is the fact that we know that Joshua 5's Passover occurred 40 years after the Exodus. We know the year of the Exodus, so coming through 40 years is relatively easy. There may be some confusion on part as far as, well, how did these days work, these years work out? Because there's a statement in the Bible that we'll take a look at that needs to be explained so that we would understand this. All of these things are required, the explanations of all of these things are required in order for you to understand how Joshua 5's Passover occurred. So let's take a look at this first scripture, and it says, "And the time we took to go from Kadesh Barnea until we crossed over the valley of the Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war was consumed from the midst of the camp, just as the Lord had sworn to them." Well, people say, "Whoa, wait a minute, there's only 38 years. We're supposed to have 40 years. Well, there's an explanation. Here's the explanation. The 40-year trek did not directly apply to the men of war, but to the sons being required to shepherd the flocks in the wilderness. "And your sons shall be shepherds in the wilderness and bear the brunt of your infidelity until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness." Number 1433. And so we have 38 years have passed since God's punishment. This meant that they had completed 39 years and were starting the 40th year. 38 years for the men of war to be consumed, plus the first year in the wilderness makes 39 years complete. This is confirmed in Deuteronomy 1:3. "Now it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that the Lord had given him as commandments to them." So here we see that the Bible places this time in Deuteronomy at the 40th year, the 11th month of the 40th year. Taking the year of the Exodus, 2519 AM, and adding 39 years to show that Moses died near the end of 2558 AM. The Israelites left Egypt at the beginning of the year, so 2519 AM is included as part of the 40 years. So you see 39 and the 40th year is in the 1 year when they left Exodus. That year it should be included. So there's where you have your 40 years. In order to place 2558 AM into the 7-day solar calendar and the Hebrew calculated calendar, we need to go through that division procedure again. It results in 12 years remainder starts at the beginning of cycle 5, chart 5, page 2. Thus the Passover of Joshua 5 occurred at the start of the following year, 2559 AM. As we look at chart 6, go back to chart 6, and we can see that the end of 2546, we have a 12-day lag there, don't we? And so this is the year that we would start our calendars out because we need to know how far behind we are at that point in time. We go to chart 3, which is the 7-day calendar, solar calendar, and we look here, we can see that 2545 is a type 10 with a 5-day carryover, and here's 2546 is a type 5 year with a 6-day carryover. So 2547, you can see would have a 0 carryover. Now we go back to the chart, and we see that here's cycle number 5, which is the cycle that we needed to be in. And we can see that the first day of Tishri for that year would be a Saturday, and it would be 355 days long. And so this is where we have to start our calendar. We'd have a Saturday, a Thursday, and a Monday, continuing on as we go down to get to 2559. Down here is where we want to be. We can now start our calendar. We can take a look at our calendar. And 2547, it had a 6-day carryover. The first Sabbath would be here. We said it had to have a 12-day lag, and here we see that it has a 12-day lag once we get into the first month. We have the Sabbath on the 1st, the 8th, and the 15th. Here the first Sabbath is on the 3rd, and we have our 12 days that we're looking for. Now, this year is a 355-day year, which I pointed out, and 365, so we get 10 days, and 10 days from 12 days leaves a 2-day leftover at the end of the year. If we follow these Sabbaths, carry on right straight through, there's no variation. We get to the first Sabbath of the following year. It's on the 7th, and the first Sabbath of the Hebrew calculated year is on the 5th. So we have our 2 days that we needed. And so remember, we said that the first of Tishri should be on a Saturday, the first one, and sure enough it is. Here it is on the 1st. 2558, if we look at 2558, the next year, we see that we have 354 days. The first day of the 7th month is a Thursday, and that's exactly what we have. Here is the 7th month. The 3rd day is a Sabbath, so the first would be a Thursday. The difference is 11 days. 10 from 11 leaves 1 day, so we should have a 1-day difference at the end of the month. And this is exactly what we have, carrying out the Sabbaths. 365th day, the first Sabbath is on the 7th. The first Sabbath of the Hebrew calculated calendar is on the 8th. So we can see that we have started the calendar out according to chart 3, which is the solar calendar, and the Hebrew calculated calendar from chart 6. And this is what we're getting. Now, what I've done is I've skipped forward in order to be able to show the year of the Passover, Joshua 5. And I skipped those intervening calendars because it's just, you can check on them yourself if you want in the written work that is accompanying the CD. Now, what we have here is this year is 355 days long. Well, let's go back to C.H. Lindo calendar, and here we come down, and this is the year. This would be the 40th year. We established that, 2559, and this time we should find the first of Tishri on a Monday, and the length of year is 355 days. So we can go to this calendar of 2559. We started out the calendar with a 1-day difference, and 355 days versus 365 is 10 days, so we add that to the 1, and you end up with 11-day difference. This is what we should find at the end of the year, and this is exactly what we find is 11-day difference, 6 versus 17. And so if we look at this, remember we said the Passover for Joshua 5 would be in the first month on the 14th. Well, as it works out, the 14th is a Sabbath. How can we correlate that with the description that we find in Joshua 5 for the Passover? This is the question. And the fact that it turned out here caused me to rethink what I knew about Joshua 5 and what was written in the book of Joshua. depicting that Passover. So let's take a look at here. Joshua 5:10 through 12 to be read with the following understanding. Verse 10. So the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. So this is the very first thing we have to understand. This statement puts Thursday evening as the commencement of the Passover. Verse 11, and they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread, and the parched grain on the very same day. So what they did is they were eating of the land. They were eating the grain of the land, and they were eating the produce of the land, unleavened bread, and parched grain on that same day. Well, was this possible? Yes, it's possible because in Deuteronomy 2:6, God tells them, he said, you shall buy food from them with money that you may eat. So they're going to be buying, as they are traveling to the promised land, they're going to be buying food from, right in that last year, that 39th year, or 40th year, they're going to be buying food from the people that live near the promised land. So as they travel through those areas, they buy food. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So what happened is God stopped manna from falling. So you can see that this Passover occurred over the weekend because of the restriction that God placed on what they could gather prior to the Sabbath day, and then they would go out on the first day of the week and gather again. So as we look at this, we got to go back to Leviticus 23 to understand the directions that God gave them when they came into the land. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf on the day after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So here's where the problem occurs, because they have these instructions. Look, you can't eat of the grain of the land. But then when we read Joshua, it sounds like, well, they are eating the grain of the land. Well, they're not eating the grain of the promised land. They're eating grain from different areas. And we're going to see where this grain came from biblically. As they were moving into the promised land, or coming to the promised land, God started Moses out on a military campaign, and this is what took place. Now, when the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. It's important to understand when they were traveling. And so we continue to read, and Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor at the commandment of the Lord and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt in the first day of the 5th month. So the first day of the 5th month is when he died. And it's the 5th month. Well, this is the start of the summer season, basically. And so we have to have this time frame. We have to keep this in mind. And so God gives the land as a possession. I make this point because we're going to come to see that what the land that they conquered, what was this land? And the Lord said to me, see, I have begun to give Sihon and his land over to you. Begin to possess it, that you may inherit his land. So he's telling me you're going to inherit the land. Well, what does that mean? That means it must be part of the promise. in Deuteronomy 2:31, he says, "Then we turned and went up the road to Bashan, and Og, king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon." God gave this land to the Israelites as a possession. So again, we're looking at this land. Well, the question is, was, in effect, this really part of the promised land? Was Moses in the promised land? Most people think he wasn't, but in fact, you will see that he was. He said, here's Moses writing. He says, "Then I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord God, you who have begun to show your servant your greatness and your mighty hand, for what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do anything like you, like your works and your mighty deeds? I pray, let me cross over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, those pleasant mountains and Lebanon." And here's where the problem comes in, because most people think, oh, well, the promised land is on the other side of the Jordan. Well, the promised land is not on the other side of the Jordan only. And so we're going to find out about this. We're going to see that, in fact, Moses and the Israelites were in the promised land before they crossed the Jordan River. We continue to read, and it says, "But the Lord was angry with me on your account and would not listen to me. So the Lord said to me, enough of that. Speak no more to me of this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah and lift your eyes toward the west, the north, the south, and the east, and behold it with your eyes, for you shall not cross over the Jordan." So when you think about this, is really quite simple, isn't it? He's on a mountain. And if he looks to the north, south, east, and west, he's looking at all the land. He's on the other side of the Jordan. So he must be in the promised land. It's pretty simple. But it's also very important that we know this, because this shows that the promised land is on both sides of the Jordan. We're going to see this from your Bible. "On the same day that the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land from the river Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the Canaanites, the Chezonites, and etc." And he continues on, and we get to the Rephaim and the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. And he's saying, their land, this is the land I'm going to give you. Well, it's important to understand about these two nations here, the Rephaim and the Amorites. Well, where were they? And we see that this was land that God promised to Abraham and his descendants. So here we see the Rephaim's land was also east of the Jordan, Genesis 14:5. The city of Asheroth is about 20 miles east of the Sea of Galilee. This proves that once they crossed the Arnon River, they were in the land of promise as specified as a covenant by God to Abraham. And so it's really quite simple that, the Israelites, once they crossed that river, they were in the promised land, and so was Moses. Now, remember, I pointed out about the time of the year. This is an important consideration. We need to know what time of the year was it that this took place. And we look here, and now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock, and they saw that the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed this region was a place for livestock. Therefore they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us over the Jordan. So these 2.5 tribes come to Moses, and they said, look, we would like to stay here. This is a pretty nice spot. And it fits perfectly with with our cattle. We have these animals, sheep and goats and cows, etc. And it's where we'd like to stay. Now, Moses, he's a little, thinking further ahead. He's thinking, well, what happens when we cross the Jordan and we have these battles to fight? And you guys are sitting back here, and I need all of your fighting men up there with us. So he thinks this through, and he makes a decision about it. And what he decides is he says, look, you need to provide 40,000 fighting men and for the army. And these men will lead the attack. They're going to be in the front. And so they think it over, and they said, well, that's not a bad thing. Our numbers are much greater than that. We can afford to send those 40,000 men. And so they had now this opportunity to take over this land. Well, it just had been conquered, and so they didn't have a whole lot to do. They had to repair some of the buildings and set up stockades for their animals, etc. And this is what they were going to do. Now, when did this take place? Well, if you look at Josephus, he says it took place in the summer. Well, it did take place in the summer. They had conquered the land in the summer. Well, what did this mean to the Israelites? What was necessary that they looked at, that they realized they had to do in order to be able to send these 40,000 men? And they had a requirement. If you look at Joshua, you will see that Joshua did just as Moses told them to do, and the people followed Joshua. So they were doing exactly as Moses had instructed them to do. Now, there's some important instructions involved in this. Now, just as a side, we need to kind of understand about manna. Now, manna was like coriander seed, and its color was like the color of bedlam. And the people went about and gathered it, ground it on millstones, or beat it in the mortar, cooked it in pans and made cakes of it. And its taste was like the taste of pastry prepared with oil. That sounds pretty good to me. I guess I like pastry. Too bad. It puts on a lot of pounds, but, got to hold back on that. So this is some information about it. Next, it says, speak to the children of Israel. Here's Leviticus 23:10. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruit of the harvest to the priest. So here's the instructions that they have to do when they come into the land. And this is where the controversy comes in. They said, well, they never had an opportunity they weren't in the promised land. They never had an opportunity, pardon me for pounding on the table. They never had an opportunity to raise this sheaf, to wave. Well, is that true? And remember, we found out something interesting. We found out that they were in the promised land, and that they were in the promised land at the middle of summer, and they had taken possession of the land. For even when you were with you, we commanded you that if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Now, this is an important little piece of information from the New Testament. And the Israelites were well aware of this, and they were hardworking people. Remember, they were slaves. And so they recognized that, this freeload that we're getting from God of the manna is not going to last. It's coming to an end. God is not going to continue to pour down this manna on us, so we need to take care of this. Well, how are they going to take care of it? Well, they have to have grain then to replace the manna that they've been getting for free. God is not running a freeloading system. So we take a look again in here. the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Now we're going to go back to read Leviticus 23. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruit of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf on the day after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So what it's saying is, now wait a minute, you cannot eat of the grain until you've made this wave sheaf offering. Now, the Israelites were well aware of it. Joshua was well aware of it. So Moses was well aware of it. So how was it going to accomplish this end goal? The basics of the sheaf of grain grown by the Israelites in the promised land. This is the next important thing that we're going to look at. Who had the responsibility for cutting the sheaf? Well, the way, it's been taught, the high priest has his chosen men that go out after the Sabbath and before this high day, and he has them go out and cut a sheaf of grain and bring it in, and then he waves the sheaf. Well, is this what the instructions that God gave to them really should be? Or is this an invention that, the Jews have come up with to make things a little easier on the high priest? Well, let's take a look at that. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you, who is the you? When you come into the land which I give you and reap its harvest, you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So who has the responsibility to cut the grain? Not the high priest. It's the people who raised the grain. They have that responsibility. Every one of them. Because everyone was looking for a blessing for himself, for his land, and this was part of it. What did God commend the individual command? The individual had the responsibility to cut the grain, and bring the sheaf to the priest. Now, he shall wave, here's his responsibility. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted on your behalf on the day after the Sabbath. The priest shall wave it, and you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. Its grain offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to the Lord for a sweet aroma. And its drink offering shall be wine, 1/4 of a hin, and you shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. So here's the instructions. Every person, his responsibility, not only to cut this sheaf of grain to bring it to him, but the only restriction that he really had was that he wasn't supposed to eat of it. He could cut it, he could grind it. In fact, he had to grind it in order to have this offering for the high priest. He could do all of these things. There's only one thing that he couldn't do. That was eat of it. Now the question is, remember, we're talking about the Israelites arriving in summertime, sometime late summer, in the promised land and taking over the land. And so the question is, what about how does this grain come about? Well, the problem is most ministers today do not really understand how small grains are growing, and when they grow. Barley is a 5-month crop. Think about that. And barley is not planted in the spring. Take my word for it. I did some farming. Barley is not planted in the spring. It's planted in the fall, like winter wheat is planted in the fall. Both crops are planted in the fall. No, the wheat harvest is longer. Barley comes first. And this is what God had instructed them to do. So if you understand this correctly, and there's another little piece of information that's important. The Israelites that were on the other, hadn't crossed over, the 2.5 tribes, were primarily cattlemen, you might say. Well, there's a practice that a lot of people are not aware of, a farming practice, and the only reason that I'm aware of it is because my ancestors, my grandfather, lived in Kansas and had raised cattle, and he also raised a lot of wheat. And my dad said, well, you know, this is what we did. We'd plant the wheat, and then we would turn the cattle out on the wheat after it came up. And he said, you know, why? Well, I said, well, why would you do that? And he said, well, because when the cattle feed on this newly growing grain, it causes the grain to stool out. In other words, stooling out is a matter of having a lot of stems coming from a single seed. And so you would increase your harvest. So this is a old-time practice. And this is exactly what the 2.5 tribes would have done. And so the reality is, yes, they raised the grain. It was raised in plenty of time for the wave sheaf offering. And it was raised in the promised land. So when we take that into consideration, it now clears up all of these problems that we would be looking at involving the Passover, Joshua 5. Remember, these were the directions given to all those raising the crop. It was a mini celebration allowing them to eat the new crop or the first crop of their field upon entering the promised land. Deuteronomy 16:9 is cited as a direction that prohibits the sheaf from being cut prior to the wave sheaf offering. And it reads, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself, beginning the count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain. And the word begin, Strong's number 2490, is a hipful infinitive of this verb. The dictionary definition of an infinitive is as follows. An infinitive, meaning unlimited or indefinite, applies to a certain mode or form of the verb by origin, a verbal noun, and in English commonly preceded by the preposition to, which expresses a general sense of the verb without restriction to person or number. And so that's the reason why when you look at that, it doesn't really apply. Now here, the English Hebrew Concordance of the Old Testament cites 4 places where the word is used in the infinitive. Genesis 11:6. This they began to do. You can see it's not definite. Deuteronomy 16:9, which we read, from such time as thou beginnest. From whatever time you begin, the count shall go forward. 1 Samuel 3:12, when I begin, I will make an end. 2 Chronicles 3:10, since the people began to bring. So you see, it's not a definite time, so it's something that we should not look to in that light. This makes Deuteronomy 16:9 a general instruction about the beginning of the counting for the Feast of Weeks, and in no way prevents the general cutting of the grain before the wave sheaf offering day. The emphasis is on the number of weeks to be counted, not the starting point. Christ tells us in John 10:35 that the scripture cannot be broken. With the correct understanding, these scriptures do agree. The wave sheaf was cut first, then the grain that was ripe was harvested in preparation for the wave sheaf offering, just as Leviticus 23 requires. This chapter prohibits the Israelites from eating the grain of the land until the wave sheaf offering. Joshua 5:11 tells us that they did eat of this grain, so the wave sheaf offering had to have been made. Verse 12 shows that God confirmed that all was done with his approval by stopping the manna the next day without any punishment or sign of his disapproval, not for following the implicit instructions of Leviticus 23:10 through 14. Not following these instructions would have been a breach so serious as to bring immediate punishment by the Eternal. They ate, and God blessed them with the conquering of Jericho. The two calendars, as brought forth from the creation, are absolute. They cannot be denied, as shown. The Passover of Joshua 5 fell on a Friday, and the first day of unleavened bread was on a Saturday. And so here we see this. Here we see that here's the calendar for 2559. We can see here's the one-day difference. So you have the Sabbath on the 1st, on the 8th, on the 15th. Here you have the Sabbath on the 7th and on the 14th. And so you can see that you have the Sabbath is on the 15th day, not the 14th day. So as far as the Hebrew calculated calendar, so the 14th day was on a Friday. And when you put the 14th day on a Friday, everything works out just right according to the description that we find in Joshua 5. And the description, of course, that we find in Joshua 5, we already went through, and we see that what they did is they had the Passover on a Friday. The first day of unleavened bread was on a Saturday. And so the wave sheaf offering would have been on a Sunday. Well, that was the first day. The Sunday is the first day of the week, and that was the day that God stopped the manna from falling. And so they had grain to eat from that time forward. We now go into the alignment of the Gregorian calendar to the solar calendar and the Hebrew calculated calendar. In order to do that, we have to look at some important information. Chart 5, page 2, cycle 7, shows the Day of Trumpets that is presently used. It begins with Thursday, October 2nd, 1997, and continues through Monday, September 14th, 2015. This is a very important section, because what it's going to do is going to show that these calendars that we've been following through these biblical accounts, in fact, carry right through to the very Sabbath day that we keep today and the very holy days that we keep today. Remember, as I pointed out, those days are fixed. They cannot be moved. And if this is really correct, neither can the days that we are presently observing. They can't be moved either if they are correct. So let's go ahead here. Here you can see 1997. And we find that Thursday, October 2nd, was the first of Tishri, or the Feast of Trumpets, and the year length of 354 days. If you follow through, you can come down. Here we are. This is the year we are presently in. And obviously, we know that September 29th, Thursday, September 29th, is the Feast of Trumpets. So here we are. We have these days. Now, if all these calendars can be correlated so that they show the same information, then we know that these days are just set. They were set, in fact, from creation. They can't be changed. Let's take a look and see what we find. There are two factors that will guide the placement of the three calendars relative to each other. One is that it must show that it is close to 6,000 years from creation, either plus or minus. Secondly, that it must be in cycle number 7, as chart 5 shows, if the dates are to be aligned. Let's go back. Here is the cycle that we're looking at. It's cycle 7. If it is true, and then we should find that these days should be aligned according to cycle 7. And this is where chart 6 is going to come in to be important. The other point is that we know that approximately 6,000 years have passed since creation. Well, how do we know that? Well, many men have done a lot of studies. And they show that, well, we're right around 6,000 years. Some say, well, we're over 6,000. Some say we haven't reached 6,000. And what did they do? They based their information on the king's historic events, the length of the reign of certain kings, etc., and they try to come up with this amount of passage of time. And it's close, but it isn't accurate. What I am going to show you is absolutely accurate to the day. You will see that when we look at this, you will see that what we are looking at is going to be an accurate calendar. Well, first thing that we have to do is we have to look at our chart 6. And we look at chart 6, and we have to be 6,000 years. And we have to be at the end of cycle 6, because remember, our E.H. Lindo's chart started on 7 for our present-day calendar. And so here we are, 6,042 years. So what this is telling us is that we're well past 6,000 years. Well, when you're looking at 6,000 years, I guess 40 or 50 years is not much. But this is what we are. And at this point, you're minus 29 days. It's lagging by 29 days. And so, okay, let's take a look at the next calendar. We go back and we said, well, maybe we're too far. And so then if we go to the 6th cycle here, in the previous set of cycles, we find that we'd be only at 5,795 years. We're a long way from 6,000 years. We're not even close. So it can't be that cycle. So therefore, it has to be this cycle. So this is the cycle. This is an absolute. We're looking at the absolute calendar. Remember that. And so we'll take and look at our absolute solar calendar, and we'll take a look and see, well, where should we be at if we're at 6,042? Well, it should be a type 1 day with a 1-day carryover. So 6,043 would follow accordingly. So we know how to start the calendar, don't we? And we know what cycle we need to be in. So let's take a look at these calendars. In here, what I've done with these calendars, I've made a different calendar here. Here we see, this is the year, the AM year, 6,043. Here is the Gregorian year, 1997. And remember, that's where we were looking to. And we said, well, we had the previous year was a type 1 with a 1-day carryover. Well, we put it in there. This is absolute. It's not going to change. This is where it's going to be. So now we have the first Sabbath on the 6th. If we look at this, we find that the calculated calendar would be 29 days. What we have to do is we have to look to see where this Sabbath is going to be. So you have a 6, 13, 20, 27, 34. If there's a 29-day lag, you'll have to be at least into the 30s someplace. So when we look at this, this would give us the lag, right? Well, we know that in C.H. Lindo's calendar told us that the first day of Tishri would be a Thursday, didn't we? And so it would be, the first Sabbath would be on the 3rd. And it said the 29th, that the first month of Nisan will have the first Sabbath on the 5th. The solar Sabbath is on the 34th day. And so when you subtract 5 from 34, you have 29 days. There is the 29-day lag that's needed. And as you can see, what I did here is I placed, here's the solar calendar in blue. Here's the Hebrew calculated calendar in red. In black, I have the Gregorian calendar. Now, the Gregorian calendar for that year, 1997, is in fact, that is the correct Gregorian calendar, placing these dates accordingly. So when we look at this here, we see that it's the 10th month. We see that October 2nd would be a Thursday, and that's exactly what it is. It's a Thursday. Now, when I first started working on this calendar, I realized that there were certain differences between the Gregorian calendar and the solar calendar. The solar calendar leap years were on alternate 2-year intervals. So they didn't coincide. The leap years didn't coincide. And then the Gregorian calendar started its year in the middle of winter. And God's calendar started in the spring. And so we have all these anomalies. And you'd say, well, how could they possibly work out? How could this be? You know, when you consider all of these things that are working against these calendars, for them to work out is really mind-boggling. You couldn't really place a mathematical formula on this for the possibility. This would be a tremendous for the three calendars to be in agreement. But in fact, the three calendars are in agreement. Here you see, 1997, we saw that what day it was supposed to be. We follow the calendar down here. We were 29 days, but we find that we had 365 versus 354. There's 11-day difference. So 29 from 11, what does that leave? It's 18 days. And so we have to have an 18-day difference in our calendar, and that's a 19 and a 1 over a 19. There's the 18-day difference. And so we see that that is taking place. Now, you also can see here, I show how the year ends. You see, I put, here's 1998 starts here. It starts during the Hebrew calculated calendar of 1997. And so it carries forward, and you would think, well, that's going to really create a problem. But it's not going to create a problem, because we're going to see how this works out. Now, we have the 1 over the 19, 1 over the 19, and we've carried the Gregorian calendar through exactly the way it has to be carried through. And so the Gregorian calendar continues on. This is the 3rd month. Here's the 4th month, the 5th month, etc. And we actually need to go back to that calendar here as a reminder. We have Monday, the 21st. That's when Feast of Trumpets should happen. Well, okay, let's take a look at our calendar and see if that happens. And so if we follow the calendar, we can see here we're following the calendar. Here we're following the calendar. It was correct here. So let's see if it's correct down here for this month. We said it should be Monday, and that's what it is, the 6th, and it should be the 20th, and that's exactly what it is on the Gregorian calendar. And so we can see here that we're in the 9th month. See, there's the 9th month, here's the 10th month, so we have the right month, we have the right day of the month, and we have the right day of the week. So the two calendars are running exactly the way they're supposed to run. Let's see. This year, we're going to see that the 1st of Tishri is going to fall on the 1st, on a Sabbath. And that's exactly when it falls. Here it is on a Sabbath. Well, here we have the 9th month, and it should fall on the 11th day of the 9th month, which the 11th day of the 9th month of this year is a Sabbath. So here we're proving that the Sabbath days that we observe are in fact the same days. These Sabbath days that we observe are in fact the same days, the same day that's a replication of 7 from the creation. This calendar is an absolute calendar. You cannot move any dates. They are fixed. And what I've done is I've provided these calendars. There's one more interesting thing that's going to establish this calendar that we've been working on here. And that is the fact that the first and second temple were destroyed on exactly the same day of the month. This day of the month was in 70 A.D., the second temple was destroyed, and it was destroyed on the 5th month, on the 9th day, the going out of the 9th day, which was a Sabbath day. And this is a recorded date. Now, it's historically recorded. It's not biblically recorded. So we are going to take a look at this time and set this calendar so that we can see whether the calendar, in effect, agrees with an historical date. And so we're looking here to see if this is in order for the 5th month. One of these calendars is going to show that. Well, we'll just go on right on. We have to start at 59 A.D. in order to be able to establish this calendar. The explanation you'll find, if you read the explanation, you will see that this explains how this calendar was set up. The small box to the left, that's this box here, has the AM year, and that is the AM year of 4105, and followed by 8 letters. That's, you see, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Sabbath day, is what you have, representing the days of the week. Below the AM year is the Gregorian date of 59 AD. Well, 59 AD, where did we get that? Below that is a series of numbers taken from the chart 3 for the year 4105. So this series of numbers here are the numbers that are taken from chart 3. So it is a 2-day carryover, and so we put in the rest of the days. The first Sabbath is on the 5th. And so that's what happens there. So we're just doing what I'm just writing out here, what I did on those charts, because I don't think it's necessary to show those, to re-show those charts. The red numbers are the Sabbaths for the Hebrew calculated calendar. And the blue numbers, of course, are the Sabbaths for the solar calendar. The black numbers are the Sabbaths in Gregorian days. Chart number 6, page 3, has the year ending with the difference of 21 days. The solar calendar is now 21 days advanced at the start of 4105. The year 4105 has 354 days. This is found in chart 5, page 2, cycle 9, top line. This shows that the first day of the 7th month, that Tishri is on a Thursday, the 4th of October. The SC is 365 days long. The difference is between the SC and the Hebrew calculated calendar will be 21 days. 21 minus 11 equals 10 days at the end of the year, and this is exactly what we find at the end of the year. And so when we're going into the next year, 60 AD, I didn't continue on with the explanations because it's really self-evident what they are. So what I did was I just skipped ahead to 69 AD. And you can check this out when you get the CD and see how all these calendars follow. One calendar follows the other. Now, here we have 69 AD. We're going into 70 AD. This year, the HCC is 384 days long. The SC is 365 days long. The difference is 19 days. So you have 0 minus 19 days. So you have 19 days difference at the end of the year. And this is exactly what you have, 1 over 20. It shows that 19 days. Chart 5, page 2, cycle 9, line 11, has the 1st of Tishri as Tuesday, the 12th of September. And if we look at this, we find, well, here's the 5th is a Sabbath, so Tuesday would be the date. And here we see we are in the 9th month. And if you take 5 days from this, you'll find that it's on the 11th. So that's the exact date that it's supposed to be on, the Gregorian day, the 9th month, 11th day, a Tuesday. And that's exactly what it is. Now, we go down into the next calendar, and this is the calendar that is quite interesting as far as I am concerned, because it shows exactly what historical information is. We're starting out this month where the Sabbath is on the 6th, the 13th, the 20th, 27th, 34th. And this year, the Hebrew calculated calendar is 355 days, 366 days, because this is a leap year. The difference is 10 days. It's at 365 days. The difference is 10 days. There was a 19-day difference at the end of 41:15 a.m., minus the 19 days, plus the 11 is 8 days. There should be an 8-day difference is what we should find. And if we go down here, that's exactly what we find. So this is shown by the red 3 over the blue 11 on the bottom line of the right-hand box. Chart 5, page 2, cycle 9, line 12, has the 1st of Tishri on Monday, the 1st of October. And so let's take a look and see if that's what we have. 1st of Tishri on a Monday. This is the 6th. It's on 6th. This is October. So the 1st would be a Monday. So that's exactly where it's supposed to be as far as the Gregorian calendar is concerned. 1st of October. The red line under the 30T has the black 6 over the red 6 for the first Sabbath, putting the 1st of Tishri as required. The second temple was destroyed on the 9th day of the 5th month, a Sabbath day, in the year 70 AD. So we've established that this is correct Gregorian, Hebrew calculated calendar, and solar calendar. This is a correct calendar. So if we look for the 5th month, 5th month of the Hebrew calendar, we should find this to be the case. And here is the 5th month. And what do we find? We find that here's the 9th is a Sabbath day. The temple was destroyed actually on the 10th. It was the going out of the 9th of Ab. That's the 5th month. And there we see that the calendar actually shows this historical event occurring just exactly as the Jewish tradition, historical tradition, shows it to be. What does this tell you? This tells you that the Jewish authorities, what calendar were they using? Well, they were using the Hebrew calculated calendar. That was the destruction of the Second Temple. This means that every Sabbath and every holy day has been preordained from creation to the present and will continue in this fixed order until the return of Christ. The facts show, without exception, that these days are spelled out in the Hebrew calculated calendar. This is, in fact, the calendar that we should be following today. It shows that the very days that we look at, the very days of the week that we use, are in fact the same days that are a replica of 7 days from the creation. It's not disputable. You can do all you want, but you cannot change those days. Therefore, all the holy days are fixed as well as the Sabbath days. This is, in fact, a proof of the Bible. And not only the proof of the Bible, but it shows what day God has designated as his Sabbath and what days he's designated as his holy days. There is no other explanation. This is an absolute proof of God's calculated calendar. It's the calendar that God has used from day one. It was a calculated calendar so that we would know ahead of time when to show up for the observance of the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, what day that Day of Atonement would be on, when to observe the Feast of Tabernacles. So this is the conclusion. And I thank you for spending the time following this fairly difficult presentation, but it's an absolute proof. In addition, I have provided for your giving you the opportunity to do your own study as far as the calendar is concerned. I've provided this chart, which actually covers all the days of starting with day one right here. You can see that. And it goes all the way through to the present day. And you can look up any of these days. They work out on the 19-year cycle principle. And you can see that this is how it works. In addition to that, I've provided the Hebrew calendar according to C.H. Lindo, which is the calendar that we use, and which is the calendar that was used throughout this presentation. Here you can see this. In addition, I've provided a series of calendars that I've gone through, which cover the period of 18 BC down to 1 AD. The reason I did that is so that you wouldn't be confused over the 0 year, which some people are confused about. And then in addition to that, I provided a calendar that covers a time period from the 27th to the 30 AD. So this would give you an opportunity to look for the crucifixion year. This concludes the presentation, and I hope that it has been of use to all of you who have spent the time and effort to follow it.